Spookies, and welcome to the Rick or Treat Horrorcast, hosted by yours ghoulie, Ricky J. Duarte. My guest host today is my best friend. She is a friend of the pod. This is her return episode. She's a theatrical professional, a director and an actor and a producer, a wonderful singer, and just an all-around talented human being. Please welcome to the podcast, Victoria Rae Sook.
Hello, everyone. I am so glad to be here.
Oh, Victoria, I'm so happy to have you. Man, oh man. So it's Victoria Rae Sook professionally, Victoria Rae Paget in your personal life because you are wed.
I am wed. I'm wed to a Mr. Paget who I'm quite fond of. And we have a baby Paget on the way.
Oh my God. So last time, first off, we're coming up on your 1-year anniversary of marriage. Congratulations. That's so exciting.
Thank you.
This time last year, we were running around like crazy people getting this wedding going.
Subsisting on like coffee and granola bars, trying to make sure I was the perfect wedding dress size.
Yeah, basically. And you were, for sure.
Thank you.
When you appeared on my podcast in... was it November, and we couldn't announce we couldn't talk about the pregnancy yet.
Right? Because it was like a couple of weeks after we had found out, so like you were one of the only people who knew.
Yeah, but now we can talk all about it. What's it being pregnant? Is it a horror movie, or is it what's going on?
Sorry to tell you, like 0 stars, would not recommend. I'm very excited for the birth of my son, but I want whatever like drugs the pregnancy is magic people are on, right? Because like pregnancy for me is like back pain, nausea, headaches, and fear that every decision I will make could potentially harm my fetus. So like anxiety all the time. But and there are moments that are great. Like the other day I was in the shower and I just like saw my belly and I was like, oh, and I started singing to it. And so like, that's like really lovely, like to have this thing and I can feel him moving inside me all the time now, which is wackadoo. That feels like a horror movie. But, we'll be much more excited when he's on the outside of me.
Yeah, I'm excited to meet him for sure. Well, today on the show, we are discussing the 1976 Brian De Palma Stephen King classic, Carrie, everyone's favorite prom date. And I wanted you specifically on the show because you are currently at Ohio University directing a production of Carrie the Musical.
Yes, it's great. It's a trip. It is a collaboration between Tantrum Theater and Ohio University. So it's a mix of students and professionals. And it's been really cool to examine this high school story with these college kids who are like just out of high school.
Totally. They're like right at that exact right age, to portray these characters really well. For my listeners who aren't aware, there is in fact a musical version of Stephen King's Carrie. I'll give a brief history of it, but I highly, highly recommend, if this piques your interest, check out the podcast Out for Blood. It is a complete history of the musical from conception up until they just released like a little bonus episode maybe 2 years after the podcast ended with just little updates. Every once in a while they'll surprise us. But Out for Blood, it's 2 British hosts who go over the entire history, but I'll give a quick little rundown. It is composed by Michael Gore with a book by Lawrence D. Cohen. So actually they wrote the song Fame from the hit movie musical Fame. They got the idea to make a musical out of Carrie. Now, at this time, stage musicals based on films was not a thing, really. Not as much, certainly not as much as it is now. It had happened, but not to the level. And they got half of the score is very beautiful, in my opinion. Some of the most beautiful gothic sounding theater,
Absolutely.
like
Yeah.
musical theater music to ever hit the stage.
He's nice, Mama. You'll like him. You'll see. Really, you will. Everyone isn't bad, Mama. Everything's not a sin. Oh, how your father whispered in my ear. First the kiss, and then the touch, mixing lies with the truth. He would sigh and try to draw me near. Oh, he'd swear he cared so much. That's what the boys do. They'll make promises, they will break your heart, then they'll laugh at you watching you fall apart. Don't you think that I know? Don't you think this has happened before? It's the smell of the blood that will drive them mad, chasing you like a horse. Yes!
And that's really the music between Carrie and her mother. It's very emotional, it's very scary, and it takes powerhouse singers in order to perform it.
Don't you know the game? Have you lost your mind? Can't you see Satan's passion has made you blind? And this boy's like the rest, and they're all like the serpents who crawl. You can beg all you want to, but I recall how your father came to me that night. The same thing will happen to me. With the smell of smoke and gin. And you'll see. And he took me and touched me. I tried to find one word that I've said. May your father sin. Sometimes I wish you were dead, but the sin never dies.
The other half sounds like the movie Fame. So it's a lot of kind of,
That's absolutely true.
Especially the version that was released in 1986. It started with the Royal Shakespeare Company. So that was a big deal because, hello, it's the Royal Shakespeare Company and you're doing a musical about killing a pig and a woman having her period on stage. And, that got a lot of controversy. So it went through a lot of rewrites. And there's not an official cast recording of that 80s production because it technically closed after opening night. It ran in previews for a couple of weeks, and the thing is, it was finding an audience, and people truly believe if it had been allowed to stay open just a little bit longer, it would have lasted. Maybe not as long as something like Les Mis or Phantom, but it would have found its audience, and it would have, done better. It was just never quite given the chance. They also completely blew their budget, and it just, the musical was confusing to people. Anyway, it went away for many, many years. There were a couple of like bootleg productions where someone maybe found the score illegally and like put up a production of it. But in 2000, I think it was 2000, was it 2013?
13, yeah.
Jesus Christ, 9 years ago. It was, they revised it and they revived it. And it was produced off-Broadway at the Lucille Lortel, is that it?
Lortel.
At the Lucille Lortel Theater in the West Village. And I got to see that production twice. Marin Mazzie, the wonderful Marin Mazzie, played Margaret White. Now on Broadway, it was Betty Buckley. Lindsay Haitley played Carrie. And off-Broadway, it was Molly Ranson as Carrie and Marin Mazzie as Margaret White.
I remember how those boys could dance, pressing close on Friday nights. They could sweep me away.
Mama?
Oh.
The changes that they made to it toned down some of the more... I have very strong opinions about this new revised version. I
do too, actually.
Yeah, I love it a lot. I think that they chickened out a little bit with some of the more frightening aspects of the story, and they made it a little more safe, but I understand why.
It's also in the giant deep dive I've done in looking at the 80s one versus the one from 9 years ago versus the film versus the novel. I feel like when they revised it, they followed the novel a lot more closely.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I mean, even little things that like they used to say like Old Man Henry had a farm, and then they say Old Man Henty because that's the novel, but like what is Henty? And just stuff like that. And I think one of the strengths in it, though, is that it did the Sue's interview frames, right? So we have Sue interviewing, and it's like all done in a giant frame of like her being in the interview room talking about it, which makes it instantly more humanizing. Which I feel like we can connect to it because we can all be like, oh yeah, cop's office, like it looks like it starts off looking like an episode of Law and Order or something on stage in a way that somebody can really relate to, rather than like the 80s one where they started with the first high school opening number, like prancing in with leg warmers.
And telling everybody, and the gym coach telling the girls that they're too fat and they have to work out more.
Yes, it's crazy.
The entire opening number is the gym coach telling girls the boys aren't going to like you unless you're thin to fit in. It's
to fit in, and then it's like, I worry, what if like I get split ends or something? It's hysterical. Like which I think, we all do kind of worry about our split ends and being thin enough, but this makes it a little bit deeper about the worries of,
I do think
about their SATs.
One of the revisions, one of the best things about the revised version is that opening number, because it's so strong. It's in your face. You understand that these, not just Carrie, but all teenagers are under pressure.
Yeah.
But then, it's kind of like they're taking a lot of this pressure out on Carrie.
Yeah, absolutely. That something we've talked about a lot in rehearsal is that like everybody needs a scapegoat. And it's like, if we make fun of her, then I know that the high schoolers aren't going to make fun of me.
Yep. Carrie is perhaps my favorite Stephen King story. Not perhaps the book as written. It's a great book. I love this book. I think that some of his prose in other publications of his are more appealing to me. But as a story, Carrie is my absolute favorite from him. It was his first. He was working on this, and he actually threw it out. And he really felt that there wasn't anything there. And his wife dug it out of the garbage and gave it back to him and said, no, you really need to work on this.
Yeah, that's so incredible. I love that.
It was an instant bestseller. It took off. This was his first hit. He had been writing short stories and selling them to magazines. I believe a couple of them went to Playboy and other publications. And when this one sold, he was an instant household name. It would be just a few years later that The Shining would come out, and that would be the one that really solidified him and got him,
I mean, when he was writing this, when he got the idea for Carrie, I'm getting this from On Writing, his book, but he got the idea he was a janitor, and he was cleaning the girls' locker room, and he didn't know what a tampon machine was, and he had to ask the other janitor, like, hey, what is that? Why is that not in the boys' locker room? What is that? And then he said that his mind started turning about like, what if somebody didn't have a quarter that day? What if what would that be like? And that in like some locker rooms they were pay and some they were free. And it's just like, and it just really got his mind turning. And I just think that's incredible. Like, he was working as a janitor when he wrote this incredible story.
I didn't know that part of it. That's crazy. I've read On Writing. I guess I forgot that. He also,
that might be in the intro to the latest edition of Carrie. I've read a lot. It might be blurring together.
Yeah. Well, the character, he was inspired to write Carrie as a character by two young women that he went to high school with, or maybe not high school, he went to school with. And one of them, she wore the same clothes to school every day, and it turned out that her family did not have money, and so she came from a poor house, and the kids made fun of her for it. Another one was a woman, like a mother in his neighborhood, hired him to maybe move furniture or paint a room in their house or something, and when he got into the house, he realized how religious the family was, like to an alarming degree of religious imagery all over the place, and the behavior inside the home. And so he combined these two people that he knew as a child and put together the character of Carrie White. Now, neither of those women lived long enough to ever read the book. One of them passed away at her own hand, and the other, I don't remember how she died.
She was young. It was tragic. I remember reading this. I can't remember exactly what it was, but yeah, but they both died pretty young.
Yeah, it's it just kind of adds to the tragedy of the story as well. I think that this story speaks so well to so many people through the years because it is about bullying, and bullying has been a thing as long as people have been around. And I think one thing that the musical does that the film doesn't is asks the question, what does it cost to be kind?
Absolutely. And like, what does it look like to change your behavior to someone? Like, because a lot of it does sound like fame. I was telling people, like, this show is High School Musical until it's not, right? If we play the ending at the beginning, it's boring. It starts off like we're coming in on our pre-show. They're playing prom night hits, and you're getting all ready for prom night, and then this thing in the shower happens, and it's just like, how would lives be different if we even like stop to think for a second? Like, it's a show of like first instincts. If anybody stopped long enough to think that what they were doing was maybe actually very unkind, that they wouldn't be doing it. And I think that happens a lot to us in life sometimes. We get swept up in a moment and we act on our first instincts, and that the rights for the show don't dictate a time period, because it's mostly based off of the revival 9 years ago. And so we've set it in 2023, and it's just been really interesting to see how bullying comes in like a cyber world. And like, we have cell phones, and what does it look like if we film Carrie in the shower and then post it, and how does that change things? And I think that really hit home to a lot of the students in the show.
Yeah, I think that's a clever approach. So after I saw the off-Broadway production, I think it was the second time, there was a Q&A with some of the cast were there as well. And so I brought up the question, in that production particularly, they shied away a little bit from the horror of it. And I asked them, it felt as though, you were focusing a little less on the horror of this story and leaned a lot more into the bullying. And it was at that time that online bullying was a real big thing. It Gets Better. It Gets Better was a big deal, and online bullying was a little bit new. It had been around, it had been happening, but it was really blowing up at the time. And I do remember not liking their response, saying that Carrie is not a horror story. I think that that's dismissive. It's kind of the kind of vein of people who will say something like, well, Silence of the Lambs isn't a horror movie, it's a thriller. And it's only movie reviewers saying that so that they are allowed to say that they liked it. Does that make sense? You're dismissing horror as a genre because you saw a movie that you liked and you refuse to accept it as horror. Like, Carrie is it's a lot of things. It's a tragedy, and it's a a morality tale, and it's a horror story.
Well, I'm with that completely. And, obviously you are a much bigger horror fan than me, but realizing that horror often gets cast aside as like campy and not real. And I was, chatting with a cast once, I was like, what is scarier than the truth and honest? So like, if we make all of these decisions honestly in the moment, that's actually is what's terrifying. And if people say, like, oh my gosh, like we learn from our laughter in musical comedy, and Hairspray is so much fun, but teaches this amazing lesson because we laugh. Laughter is amazing, but we can also learn through our fear in musical horror. And there's no reason to delegitimize that as a genre.
I think that's brilliant. When you told me, 'cause I don't think I've said this yet, Carrie is my favorite musical, the version from the 80s. There is a bootleg version of the Broadway stage production on YouTube. I discovered that probably when I was 12 or 13. There was a website.
That's
and
incredible.
It wasn't the whole video. The whole video has been like illegally passed around. But I found some Stephen King website that talked about it, and all that it had was a clip of the song "And Eve Was Weak" between Carrie and her mother. It's a big scene where Margaret punishes Carrie.
I thought I was dying. I started crying. Mama, please don't. You become Satan's bride. see is I can see you inside.
Don't believe when you're
I
lying.
can see how you lie.
But I never told you.
That's how Lucifer fell.
Mama, how could I know?
And you're headed for hell. I won't let you go. Satan loves a sinner, not a sinner. Satan's open burning, not his burning prayer. He will burn you. God made Eve from Adam's rib, and Eve was weak, and Eve was weak, and I was weak. I prayed this day would never come. I should have known. I should have known. Now I am alone and so afraid. Oh Lord, I've seen this power before. The flesh is weak and I am Lord. Father, don't forsake her. Father, take her. Cleanse and purify her with the fire and the power and the glory forever and ever and ever.
And then the destruction scene. And that in the 80s production is a very strange staging, the way that they did it with lasers, and they someone comes up behind her and dumps the pig's blood on her because they couldn't get the effect to work coming from the sky because it was ruining her microphone every night. So all of these challenges that they were dealing with. Anyway, long story short, it's my favorite show. So you came to me and said, Ricky, I'm directing the show. I'm so excited. Will you teach me about Carrie? And, you know,
Yeah.
we watched the film together, and I'm always happy to watch this film. And we just talked about it, and I knew instantly that you would be the right director for this project because you carry such empathy. You see the world. Victoria and I are very much like Elphaba and Glinda. If we to the point that she's literally wearing pink right now and I'm wearing black right now.
You know, black is this year's pink.
That is so true. Oh my gosh.
And you know, it's two unlikely best friends, me looking at the world in a very kind of cynical goth dark way, and Victoria seeing light and beauty. And I think that in a lot of ways we're like this pink and black yin yang, and we can balance each other out. You know, she reminds me that the world is not all garbage, and I remind her that not everything is unicorns and rainbows, although I wish.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so I thought I knew that you would bring this really great perspective to this. The show needs empathy, and it needs a little bit of light up until the moment at the end where there's no light left. And that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think it needs a woman to direct it, because there's so much with Carrie and her mother, right? And you even said like Eve was weak is when Margaret is punishing Carrie. Like, yes, she's punishing her, but we've developed like she's trying to save her. You know, like we have these iconic moments in the film and in the musical of like dragging Carrie across the floor to push her into the prayer closet. And, you know, I've talked a lot with my Margaret. It's like, that's your last resort. That's like the safe place where you can shelter her from all of these things. So you, in your mind, have to get her in there. It's not like you're putting her in timeout. It's getting her in this place and just realizing like everyone, I think most women I know, I guess, have this moment of like wanting to be their own person, but still wanting to please their mother. Regardless of the relationship they had with their mother. Like, I know I still look to my mom for validation, and I'm 35. Like, it's not necessary, but like you crave it. And so to have that really delve into that relationship has made this production, I think, a lot more interesting, because we have two strong women like talking about what that means.
I think that's a brilliant point, actually, but there is not, to my understanding, and up until at least a couple of years ago, there has not been a massive, like a big, like professional production led by a woman yet. There was the remake of the film that was directed by a woman. That movie doesn't work for many reasons, and I don't think it's the fault of a female director. I just think it's, you know, they tried to do too much in that film. And it's interesting because it follows the book more closely than the De Palma film. She
Mm-hmm.
destroys the whole town. The stones fall on her house. But at the same time, this is why Stephen King books don't often work on screen unless you make changes. He is not so esoteric that he writes things that only like a couple people are going to like. He writes really fucked up weird stuff that everybody can relate to. He's so good at
Yes.
writing people, and the people in his stories are what draw audiences in that maybe wouldn't even normally read horror, because his characters are so real.
Absolutely. Yeah, and to speak to that other film, there are things that I think get done really brilliantly in that. But then there are also things that I think sometimes it gets a little campy. Like there's a deleted scene of like Chris and Norma making out, I think, and it's just like, why is that a thing? But it was deleted. But so it's just very interesting to see, because everybody can relate to this. Like I very strongly relate to the mother-daughter relationship, but I think everyone can relate to this story exactly as you said, for some reason, you know. And when I tell people I'm directing Carrie, I get two responses, like, oh, the pig's blood one, or like, oh man, I felt like an outsider. Like Carrie is my story. I feel that. And I get that way more often than I was expecting to.
I think this story appeals to me so much. My brother and I were severely bullied in elementary school, junior high, up until I was bullied until I came out of the closet. And once I was able to call myself a faggot, nobody else did. Nobody else could, you know?
Right.
But I was in elementary school, I was a fat, gay, sensitive kid, you know, and I cried a lot. And because due to bullying, I had my first suicidal ideations at the age of 12. And, you know, my mom and dad pulled me and my brother out of our school to be homeschooled because it was so bad. Whatever that experience did for me or didn't do for me, you know, the intention behind it was to protect your children. And so that comes back to Margaret wanting to protect Carrie, you know. So bullying is real. And it's just every time I watch this movie, when Carrie is at the prom and she's never danced before and she finally gets to dance, and she's never been kissed before and she finally gets kissed, and then she, you know, wins prom queen. Spoiler, everybody.
Yeah.
It breaks my heart, and I do tear up every time because I want it to end differently. I just wish that it ended differently. I think that aside from the, you know, the great source material, I think that De Palma does a remarkable job of building the emotion and Spacek does a remarkable job of getting you to believe in Carrie.
Yeah. You want to be on her team, and it would be very easy to not want to be on her team, to be someone else who's dismissing her, to hate her after what she does at the prom. But even at the very end, you're still on her team. And I think you're right. The first time I watched the film, I was like crying when she was dancing at prom because I knew what was coming. And like something I've developed with the Carrie in this show, there's a big number called Prom Climax, and it's like right before she gets crowned and everyone's dancing and they're all talking about how it's going to be a night they'll never forget. And I've been working with the woman playing my Carrie, saying that the more fun she has there, the higher higher she has to fall.
Yeah.
That, you know, it's like versus in the opening number when we have this like volleyball dance sequence where she's purposely offbeat and can't catch up. Here, she's perfectly in sync. She's in. She feels like she's part of it, and then it gets ruined.
Ruined in a big way.
A big way. It's not like someone like spills wine on her shoes. You know, it gets ruined in a really big way. And yeah.
Well, and there's symbolism behind the use of blood that I'm sure we'll talk about as we go through the plot of this film. Before we start doing that, it's been a while since I've given some horror recommendations or things to avoid, and I want to do that really quick before we go over the movie. Do you mind if I do that?
Please go for it.
Right. I have to dish. I'm writing for, you know, I write film reviews for spoilerfreereviews.com and ruemorgue.com, Rue Morgue magazine. So
woohoo!
I've been getting sent a lot of screeners, and some of them are gems and some of them are not gems. But a particular gem that I very much loved was a Mexican horror film called Huesera, The Bone Woman. I can't recommend this movie enough. It's currently available VOD. It is, I'm not going to spoil anything, but it is female-driven horror to the max. I was able to interview the director of photography of the film, Nua Rubio Sherwell, and she gave me some incredible insight about the process of making this film. The movie's about a young woman, Valeria, who is pregnant and feels forced to have a child and forced to live a life that she maybe doesn't relate to. And it's very interesting the way, particularly and Newer explained this to me, in Mexican culture, how that is reflected in this film, and how it it's an expectation in America as well. It comes from a different place in Mexico, and it's scary. It's brilliant, and I cannot recommend this movie enough. It is, I think, one of the best movies that I've seen in the last year.
That's awesome.
Oh my God, so good. After you have given birth, I would I would like you to watch
I was
it.
just thinking that. I was thinking I might wait on this one.
Yeah, I do think you'd like it. And I know that you don't like to watch a lot of horror. I think you could handle this one.
It's gotten worse now that I've been in this like actor housing at OU, which is lovely. It's wonderful. But I have this giant house that's like 4 times bigger than my New York apartment, all to myself, that has these sounds and has these things like, so, because there is a part of me that is a chuggy millennial who loves a serial killer. So I watch You on Netflix, and I've had to stop that. Like, I can't watch that by myself. I'm just like, oh God, he's here. Like every noise, I'm like, Joe is here. He's going to kill me. Or like, maybe it's the cocaine bear outside. So it's gotten a little worse. You'll have to reintroduce me.
I mean, I wish I could find a man who would be as interested in me as Joe is.
Oh God.
Cocaine Bear. Let's talk about Cocaine Bear. Since you brought it up, this was it's based on a supposedly true story. In 1985, a bear was found dead in the woods. It had eaten a duffel bag full of cocaine that had fallen from an airplane. Now, the guy who dropped it jumped out of the airplane, but his parachute didn't go off, and he landed in somebody's driveway dead. So it's a big, fucked up story.
This is why we don't jump out of planes on cocaine.
Exactly. Now, the cocaine killed the bear. When they announced this film and they announced that Elizabeth Banks was directing it, I thought that was, if they were going to go from a comedic approach to this really messed up story, I thought that she would be perfect to helm this. And it has a lot of her sensibilities. It has a lot of, if you think of Wet Hot American Summer and how funny and off the wall that movie is, it's not nearly as subversive maybe of a comedy as that is, but it's there. The screenwriter of Cocaine Bear was Jimmy Warden, and he wrote The Babysitter and The Babysitter Killer Queen, so he has a sarcastic kind of attitude as well. Cocaine Bear is worth watching. I'm not telling anybody not to watch it. I was disappointed. I really thought that it would be funnier. I thought that it would be funnier or gorier. And I know that you're rolling your eyes at me right now, listeners, because it is very gory, insanely gory. I mean, whatever, Victoria, you are imagining for blood and guts in this movie, double it.
No,
but in a funny way.
Right.
It's just, for me, the action sequences were very few and far between. When they happen, they're great. And in the middle of those, kind of, sandwiched in, was a lot. It was too many. It was a lot of characters coming from different places. Now, they all come together in a good way in the end. It was just a lot happening at once for a movie that should have been very simple. But I didn't hate it, like it. I also, all right, I'm going to sound old right now. But Can we stop pretending? Can we stop pretending that CGI animals look good on screen? They don't. They look like garbage.
They do not look good.
Everyone's saying that the bear looks great, and in some shots the bear does, but in other shots, it just looks completely CGI. And you know what? Here's my thing too. I realized this literally last night. I was watching Nightmare on Elm Street 3: Dream Warriors, and there's a lot of stop motion animation in that movie. And I guess I learned a lesson watching that, in that because I grew up with that generation of filmmaking, I can suspend my level of disbelief and accept that. I think that people like Gen Z can probably watch CGI special effects and stop their
Right. It's what
suspension
we're
of
used
disbelief.
to.
Yes, and they can accept that. So like, yeah, I'm gonna be a bitchy elder millennial who complains about modern special effects and how practical is better. But there were many instances in Cocaine Bear where they could have used practical effects for at least the blood and gore. If you're going to do a CGI animal, fine. There's so much in that movie that they could not have done with that bear if it were an animatronic or a puppet. I totally get that. But like the blood and the gore does not need to be computer animated. And that to
Right.
me is very painfully obvious when it's just dripping. Blood dripping does not look good when you've animated it.
Yeah. It seems to me like, based on what you're saying, I don't know if you remember the show that the movie I produced and creative consultant, Stag, that horror film.
Oh,
That
I remember it. I loved it.
But it was comedy horror, yet still terrifying, right? And I had a very long talk with that director, Alexander Spieth, about how horror films have to decide if they're going to be like honest or comedy. But like you can be a comedy horror, not honest. There's another word, but just like which one you're going to stick to. Are you going to be like straight horror or comedy horror? And you then cannot blur the lines, because even comedy horror can be terrifying, was I feel like the end of Stag was. But it's getting into it. So it feels like Cocaine Bear needed to pick a lane if it was going to be true horror or comedy horror and decide.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, and the cast is great. Margot Martindale is a national treasure, and God preserve her. She is so good in it. Ray Liotta, this was his last film before he passed away, and he's great because he's playing like a drug moving kind of cartel, drug pusher. I don't fucking know what the term is, but he's playing it as though he's in a movie about moving cocaine. And so he is serious and scary as it can be. And he, that is effective. Carrie Russell's great. The children in it are great.
I didn't realize it had all these
the cast knows what movie. I know the cast knows what they're doing. The guy who plays the sheriff is wonderful. So, and I'm not saying that Elizabeth Banks doesn't know what she's doing. I guess my expectations were not met. In my review that I wrote for the film, I said, just like the drug, the movie's highs are very high, but its lows are a real downer. And just like cocaine, the high never seems to last long enough. And I said, it's a hell of a drug, but just a heck of a movie. And I think that sums up my opinion. All right, I have one more movie to talk about, Children of the Corn. So this is coming out the day that Children of the Corn is released. I got to see it a month ago. I just interviewed the film's writer and director, Kurt Wimmer, and two of the movie's young stars, Elena Camporis and Kate Moyer. So, Children of the Corn. Speaking of Stephen King properties, right? This has never been my favorite Stephen King. I've actually never really cared for the original film. I love Linda Hamilton. I love her in Terminator. I love her in Dante's Peak. She's given nothing to do in this besides beg her boyfriend to marry her and then get told what to do, and then she's tied for a cross in a cornfield for the rest of the movie. So she's not given a lot of agency. The guy who plays her boyfriend is just cocky and celebrated for it in a weird way. It's just never really worked for me. This is the 11th Children of the Corn movie.
Wow.
There's a meme going around that says, name a horror movie that should never have become a franchise. And most people are naming Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And while I agree with that, because only a couple of those movies actually work, Children of the Corn never should have been a franchise. I'm coming at this movie from a perspective of it's not one of my favorites anyway. But he does something really interesting with it. He removes the religious zealousy aspect completely, right? So these children are no longer pushing a religious biblical agenda and, the whole a child will lead them thing. That's all gone. And I think if you're going to watch this movie and have a successful experience, you have to know that up front. The movie doesn't do a great job of preparing us for that, right? We are so tied to the idea of religiously zealous children in these movies that the fact that it's missing is a little jarring. The opening sequence is not clear. It's a little confusing. There are choices in this movie that just don't make sense, and you have to accept that. What does work about this movie is that they make the choice of this farm town in Nebraska, a corn farm town. The parents have ruined the corn crops, right? They sold out to big farming, and they have just the crops are dying, and they're gonna just sell them and take
Mm-hmm.
get subsidized, and leaves the children with nothing. And so they've ruined the futures of their children. And so if the kids represent humanity and the corn represents the earth, it's very modern in saying that generations before us have fucked up the future for our kids when it comes to the planet and, the economy. So it's coming from a great perspective in that way. It just, in my opinion, fumbles the ball and doesn't do a great job of being clear of the intent. These two actors that I mentioned, Elena and Kate, are mind-blowingly talented. I was so impressed. Elena's wonderful. She is an older person. She's like maybe 19 in the movie. So I am going to focus a little more about talking about Kate's performance. She was 11 when she made this movie. And
Wow.
she will blow your mind. Now, this was filmed literally right when COVID started. So it's 3 years later. I got to talk to her now. She's 14. And it's interesting, too, to see her perspective of when she was 11 versus now. My interview is coming out on ruemorgue.com, so check it out. It's very interesting. It was this guy, though, Kurt, the writer and director, has been at this for a long time. He made Equilibrium and then Ultraviolet, and he wrote the movie Salt with Angelina Jolie, and he wrote the Total Recall remake. So he's been in the business for a long time. I watched a couple of his interviews before I talked to him to get a feel for him, and he does come off as a little bored in interviews, or a little bit I can't find the word. Anyway, I asked him my first question, and he went on and on and on and on about it. And by the end, he had answered like 3 of my questions for him at once. So I'm just sitting there like, fuck, what do I do now?
Right.
Plus, they didn't tell me that Elena would be in on the interview either, so I had no questions lined up for her. So I had to I actually was proud of myself. I came up with a couple right on the fly.
I'm sure you did.
I like my interviews to be more of a conversation instead of a question and answer.
Yeah, of
but
course.
with this film, because it's a higher profile than some of the other ones that I do, I only had 10 minutes with them. So I had to be a little more scripted than usual. Anyway, so Children of the Corn is going to be in theaters for 3 weeks, and then it'll be VOD. I think that horror fans are going to find something interesting to see. I think that horror fans, I'm not saying you're going to love this movie, but I think that you'll find things to like in it. That's all I got. I think that this movie can lay the franchise to rest. I don't know that we need any more Children of the Corn movies. And with that being said, those are my recommendations. Victoria, let's go trick-or-treating.
Let's go trick-or-treating.
Today we're talking about Carrie, 1976, directed by Brian De Palma. The screenplay was by Lawrence D. Cohen, and of course based on the novel by Stephen King. Now, Brian De Palma is a hell of a director, known for Body Double. Have you ever seen Phantom of the Paradise? It's a rock musical with Jessica Harper. Great. We're having a movie night. We're doing Phantom of the Paradise, and then we're doing Shock Treatment immediately after. Shock Treatment is the sequel to Rocky Horror.
Great. Love it.
De Palma directed Dressed to Kill, The Untouchables. Very famous director, and I think was the right one for this particular story.
I think so.
It stars Sissy Spacek in one of her very first roles, if not her first role. She actually was not going to be allowed to audition for this, and her husband got her the job. He was working on the film, I think maybe in the sound department. And he got her. Yeah, he got her the audition. De Palma didn't want to see her initially, and she was perfect. I don't think anybody could have played her. Except
she's incredible.
Piper Laurie plays Margaret White, Carrie's mother. Now, they were both nominated for Oscars for this film, which is incredible because the Oscars almost never nominate horror. We have Amy Irving as Sue Snell. Amy Irving, excellent actress who I never really felt like she got as much of a career as she deserves. She's in another one of my favorite genre movies, The Fury, as well. John Travolta, this is John's first movie. He had come from Broadway. He was in the original production of Grease on Broadway. And he was, what's the nerd's name in Grease?
Like Duty or Eugene?
Eugene.
Like the super nerd is Eugene.
Yeah, I think he was Eugene in the original Broadway production, and this was his first film role. He's so hot at this age in his life. Oh my god. In this, Saturday Night Fever, Grease. Have you ever seen the sequel to Saturday Night Fever, Staying Alive?
No.
Great, added to the movie night. He's
Yes.
starring in a Broadway dance show, and so while in Saturday Night Fever it's all disco dancing, in Staying Alive it is like 80s jazz and musical theater dancing, and he's incredible in it. It's a terrible movie. I think it's directed by Sylvester Stallone's brother.
Hmm.
William Catt as Tommy Ross. William Catt is known for being theatrically for being the original Pippin on Broadway. He is the one in the recording, the kind of like official recording of it. Nancy Allen is Chris Hargensen. Nancy Allen would go on to have a great career in 80s horror films. She's in Dress to Kill. She plays the sex worker. And so she worked with De Palma again. Betty Buckley as Miss Collins. Now, a lot of confusion here. In the book, her name is Miss Desjardins.
Yes.
In the film, it's Miss Collins. And in the musical, it's Miss Gardner.
Yes.
But basically, she's the gym coach.
She's the gym teacher.
PJ Souls as Norma. PJ Souls auditioned for the role of Carrie, and I believe Amy Irving did as well. So PJ Souls would go on to be in Halloween as Linda, everyone's favorite phone call, and Rock and Roll High School. She did a handful of other horror films as well. She was in the 2018 Halloween as well, just her voice. They didn't give her any screen time, which I thought was a real waste of her.
She's one of the students in the ensemble that really stands out to me in that movie, that she very much makes the character her own, and you see her journey with it.
Totally. Totally. She's in Halloween, that's her like word of the week. She says totally a million times.
Totally.
And I'm going to say that's kind of our biggest cast members. Yeah. All right. So, let's get into the plot of Carrie. The film was made on a budget of 1.8 million, and it brought in 33.8 million in the US and Canada. So it was a hell of a hit. It was a really big deal when this movie came out.
Totally.
So the movie opens in the girls' locker room of Bates High School. So I can't remember the name of the high school in the novel, but in this film
Ewing.
It's called
Thomas Ewing High School. Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Ewing. Ewing. Yeah, of course.
God, I'm so glad you're on this episode. It's called Bates High School in the film as a tribute to Norman Bates from Psycho.
Yeah.
In the movie, there is a screeching violin riff or motif that keeps happening when Carrie uses her power. And it's, of course, inspired by the screeching violin from the shower scene in Psycho. De Palma wanted Bernard Herrmann, who had composed the score for Psycho, to do this, and he either died or was unavailable. Regardless, they totally ripped off his screeching violins from Psycho.
Yes, they did. They did.
It's a slow motion, kind of like a soft glow, like someone put Vaseline over the camera lens. Slow pan through this girl's locker room. A lot of nudity for portraying high school girls, if you ask me.
So much right at the start.
It's not, in my opinion, and it doesn't feel male gazy. It doesn't feel like, hey, look at these titties. But that's me, a man's opinion.
No, I would agree with you there. I don't feel like it's like hubba hubba locker room. It's meant to show how vulnerable they all are.
Yes.
Like we are our most vulnerable when we're naked, and it's panning through this locker room with many, many, many naked women, and it's just showing them raw, without any covering. And I think it does a really good job in setting up how vulnerable Carrie is, because they're all naked getting along, and then she's not.
Well, and if we really consider it, I don't know that any of the other girls are completely naked. They are in various stages of dress, whereas Carrie is alone in the shower, as though she had waited for everyone else to leave the shower before she used it, and she is fully nude.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some like Passover shots of like, whoa, that's a lot of nakedness, but they're getting dressed. That's very true. They're already, they're putting their armor back on, so to speak, their clothes for the day, whereas Carrie hasn't had a chance to do that yet.
I'm not in any way excusing showcasing high school girls in the nude. That is not my intention here. I do think that consumption is not endorsement, and I do think that you have to consider the time period that a movie comes out in
Yeah.
order to appreciate it. It doesn't mean that you are condoning, like, this wouldn't be showcased now. It just wouldn't be.
No, no, absolutely not. I do see, I think, why it happened. And I think that it gives a really, it lets you know what you're watching right away.
Yeah. And we get some fairly close-up shots of Carrie washing herself in the shower, and kind of a pan along an arm. You'll see one breast, you'll see she has kind of one leg up as she's washing that leg, and you see a thigh, and at a point you see blood trickle down that thigh, and she touches it and holds it up to her face and is horrified.
Yeah.
Absolutely horrified. The score in this moment is really lovely, just very feminine sounding, a little spooky and effective. It's kind of Carrie's theme. It'll play again at the end of the film.
Yeah.
So Carrie thinks she's dying, and she runs out into the locker room and starts showing all the girls, and she's screaming and crying, and the girls catch on real quickly that she doesn't know that she's having her first period.
Right.
And at a point, Carrie grabs Sue's arm, and the blood gets on her white blouse, and everyone's just laughing at her, throwing tampons at her, shouting, "Plug it up, plug it up, plug it up." It's really, really mean. It's interesting. You said before, in a moment, you might have a reaction before you realize what you're doing, because Sue is laughing at what's happening. But when Miss Collins, the gym coach, sees it going on and runs over, she grabs Sue and kind of shakes her and is like, "What the hell are you doing?" And it's like Sue realizes in this moment, "Oh shit, what am I doing?"
Right. Yeah. She's gotten totally swept up in it. And it's interesting because it starts as this like sing-songy, like period, period. And then when they shift to the plug it up, it gets really aggressive. And, they're throwing tampons at her, and they're like some towels and some socks. Like they're just throwing things at her. And I think it's very much the like, they're made uncomfortable by the fact that she doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah. And, it's interesting to think this is something that every single person in this scene has experienced. And you would hope that there would be some kind of empathy somewhere. And Miss Collins, I'm going to call her a different name every time I say her name.
She's got three of them.
The gym coach, Betty Buckley, who, I don't think I mentioned this, went on to play Margaret White in the Broadway production of Carrie. By the way, interesting that she had a connection to the film and the stage musical. She's the only one who is concerned, and Carrie is crouched in the corner while the girls are taunting her. And when Miss Gardner approaches, she's screaming and crying. God damn it, Miss Gardner. When Miss Collins approaches and Carrie's screaming and crying, Miss Collins slaps her, and it kind of knocks Carrie into it. It calms it. She breaks, and she bursts into tears.
Yeah, she gets out of the shock.
Yeah, and she bursts into tears. She hugs Miss Collins, and
I think before we leave that scene, though, we have to talk about the light.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think that it's really important because there's lots of it's Carrie's first use of telekinesis, and she doesn't even know that she's doing it, and it's this balance of like, and I know that Stephen King has written about he read that women start to get their, like, if they have the telekinetic powers around the age of maturity and when they start getting their period. But it's like, is it that she comes into her power then? Or is it that she's gone through such an emotional, intense thing that the only way for it to be expressed is through telekinesis? And I think that that's really interesting to watch, that like she's been so traumatized because like maybe she had her power, and had she had a very, lovely first period with mom with milk and cookies, she never would have known. It gets almost like forced out of her through the light bulb exploding.
Sure. Well, if in the novel, she did have powers as a child and they were suppressed. And I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
the power, Carrie's power is certainly a symbol of female empowerment, right? And
Hmm.
Margaret, her mother, has a real fear of her own power as a woman and her own sexuality as a woman. And so that's where all of this suppression comes from. And we'll get to that a little bit more as we talk more about Margaret.
Totally.
I do want to point out there are theories that Carrie's power comes from having a little bit of The Shining. So in the book The Shining, we learn that Danny, the little boy, has telepathic abilities, and he can read some people's thoughts. He can actually manipulate people to do things. In Firestarter, the little girl has the ability to cause fire with her mind. In Carrie, she can move things with her mind. These are all little aspects of The Shining, which I think is really interesting. So much of King's universe ties together. It's not just mentioning, Hemingford when you're reading Children of the Corn, or, Derry Maine mentioned in another book. I mean, he really ties things together in a very interesting way to me.
Hmm.
And this is no exception. So the light bulb explodes at Carrie's height of her emotion,
Right.
and everyone notices it. So Carrie has been brought to the principal's office, and Miss Collins and the principal are having a discussion. Carrie can hear every single word that they're saying. The
Yeah.
principal's an asshole. He gets her name wrong. He calls her Cassie. Miss Collins is trying to say, her mother's religious and didn't tell her about it. She had no idea that she was having her first period. And the principal is just condescending to her. He
Yeah. Very
keeps
much.
calling her Cassie. She says it's Carrie. And Sissy Spacek she separated herself from the entire cast for the entire production of this film. She did not interact with anybody. She stayed in her trailer and stayed alone. She wanted to maintain, an she didn't want any level of comfort with her actors to come across, with her co-stars
Mm.
to come across on screen. And I think that was very effective. Her hair is always kind of in her face. She's got a downward gaze, and she has another telekinetic moment when he calls her Cassie, and for the last time she says it's Carrie, and his ashtray flies off the desk and spins in circles and lands on the ground. She's dismissed from school. She's walking home, and we get this.
And the fact she has to walk home. Like there, in another world, somebody would have come and picked her up or something and she just walks home by
Well, why
herself
don't we
after all
talk
of
about
this.
why she's not picked up? First off, I don't know if her family owns a car. Secondly,
Yeah.
her mom is going door to door preaching the good word,
Yeah,
and
handing out pamphlets.
handing out pamphlets. She knocks on Miss Snell's door. So this is Sue's mom, and it's a great moment. This is our introduction to Margaret White. Piper Laurie was cast in this movie. She wasn't going to take it. Her husband told her, "No, De Palma, he does kind of like comedies and silly movies. You should do it." So she went into this movie thinking that she was making a comedy. And so her over the top choices, he toned them down and explained to her, "No, no, 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 no. This isn't a comedy. Like you're
Right.
a bad guy. You're supposed to be scary." But I think that she maintained that bigness in such an effective way.
Oh God, yeah. She's incredible. There's something, I mean, she's truly iconic in this role and brings so much strength to it, which is what's terrifying. I feel like, you know, very few actors could make those strong of choices and commit to them. They would be kind of laughing in spite of themselves, and she's
Yeah,
not. She's 100% in every single choice.
absolutely. Absolutely. And she when she knocks on the door and Miss Snell opens it, there's an awkward moment where Margaret's like, "Are you gonna let me in?" And
Yeah.
finally she goes, "Oh, well, sure. Would you like to come in?" And she comes in, and she walks into this house, and it's automatically filled with Margaret. Right? She's big. She's grand. She's preaching the word. She pulls a Bible out of her pocket and finds a quote that she thinks is suitable for Miss Snell. Now, I believe anytime that she quotes the Bible, it's from the Old Testament, and she also makes shit up. Like she starts saying things that are not in the
Yeah.
Bible as well.
Yes, absolutely. There's a scene in where she's just shouting stuff at Carrie, and I'm like, I don't think any of that is actually in the Bible.
It's clear that Margaret is mentally unstable.
Hmm.
You know, I'm in no way comparing my family experience to Margaret White at all. But I recognize from the household that I grew up in symptoms of bipolar, symptoms of manic depression. And,
Mhm.
I absolutely think that that plays a part in Margaret as a character. At a at a point, so we see Sue Snell sneak in the back door and kind of creep away. She doesn't want to be a part of this,
Yeah, she's
and
not in.
Miss Snell has had enough, and she tells Margaret, I'd like to make a donation to the church or whatever. And Margaret gets offended. She shuts down that smile instantly, that big smile instantly.
Mhm.
And she takes the money, she puts it in a little box and walks away. And as it's very interesting, when she gets to the door to leave, she turns around and raises her hand as though to strike someone. It's
Yeah.
very deliberate, and she raises her hand as though she's going to slap her, but it's a blessing for her. I pray that you find Jesus, or something like that.
Yeah, and it's clear that she didn't want money, that she actually wanted to convert Mrs. Snell, that she wanted
Yes.
to make it clear that she needed Jesus. And so, Mrs. Snell's go-to was like, let's give this woman money and get her out of my house.
I will pay you to leave my
I
home.
will pay you to leave my home. But that wasn't Margaret's endgame.
Not at all. No, she wants to spread the good word. I saw clips of a production of Carrie where at the musical, at Margaret's entrance, when she's singing Open Your Heart, in the original production, it's a Margaret solo. In the new version, she joins along singing with a religious radio program. Anyway, Margaret's singing this song, walking down the aisle toward the stage, passing out pamphlets to audience members, which I thought was a really cool take on it.
That is really cool.
So Carrie's walking home from school, and it's a little bit iconic now. This little asshole on a bicycle is riding past her saying, creepy Carrie. And she looks at him. We get those piercing violins screeches.
Yeah.
And he falls off of his bike. And so there have been, aside from the remake with I was at Horror Movie Trivia, and the host called Chloe Grace Moritz box office poison, which I thought was hilarious.
Oh, God!
In the remake with... so there's that remake with Chloe Grace Moritz and Julianne Moore, who are... Julianne Moore is a fabulous actress. She's not Carrie White.
No, and she...
I'm sorry.
Margaret.
She's not Margaret White.
Yeah, well, she's not Carrie White because she's Margaret, but she's also not Margaret. But something that you were saying is that Margaret shows signs of disorders. In that remake, they went full throttle, and it was giving the audience no credit of being able to decipher anything. You saw her cutting herself, and you saw her, and it became not Carrie's story anymore in a way, and it's Carrie's story.
I think that, and you need to empathize with Margaret. No, you don't. I take that back. Depending on the production, there is empathy or there is not. In this film, there's no empathy for Margaret. In that movie, they approached it from maybe too much empathy. And I think the stage musical actually does a nice job of a balance, because Margaret gets that song When There's No One, talking about when my daughter's gone, I'll be alone. And that's Margaret's greatest fear, right?
Yeah, which kind of points out what a narcissist she is, because she's sitting there talking about having to end her daughter's life, which she really feels called to do by God. And she doesn't have this song about, I'm going to ruin my daughter's life by murdering her. She has a song of, my life is going to be ruined because I'm going to miss this person. Yeah. And it's very...
I would rather my daughter die than fall into sin. And, let the shadows descend like a knife, right? Is what she says in that song. So there was where I'm getting at is there was a made-for-TV version in 2002 starring Angela Bettis, who she was a great Carrie as well. She did a phenomenal job. She was in the movie May, by Lucky McGee, one of my favorite horror films. She's remarkable in that. She is basically playing Carrie in that movie as well. Mm-hmm. But in that version, the kid, he yeets off that bike. He flies across. He flies across the yard. Anyway, Carrie makes it home, and it's a rundown house. There's an empty lot next to it. Compared to Sue's house, which is, kind of ranch style and, big and spread out, Carrie's house is very small. It's a 2-story that's just small, and the paint is peeling. It's painted white. Interesting thing in the street in front of the house, there's like a parking space indicator painted
Yeah.
in the street in the shape of a cross. When you are looking at the house, it's the shape of a cross. When you are standing in the house looking at the street, it's an upside down cross, which I think is super interesting. When you are in that house, your perspective is really messed up, but from the outside looking in, the perspective is this is a holy place.
That's really interesting.
Carrie enters, and there's almost cathedral archways in this home. It's very dark.
Oh yeah, it looks like a monument in so many ways. And there's, the only other thing in the house than like Jesus is Margaret's work, which is her sewing.
Yeah. There's I think it's notable too. There's a big tapestry or painting of the Last Supper. And I think it speaks to Margaret's being misled in her faith because, the Last Supper was painted by someone who was not a man of faith,
Right.
And he was commissioned for that painting. So, she's put all of her faith, it's in this painting, it's showcased, and yet.
Well, I also think it's really, it's eerie and it's foreshadowing away that it's the Last Supper, right? It's not like Jesus on the cross. It's not that he's risen. It's the Last Supper. It's the moment. It's the night before he is crucified. Yeah. And so the whole house is always that tension of, like that in the Christian faith, like the Last Supper is the most tense anyone gets, right? It's like, it's the moments before the turmoil. And so it's like their house lives in the moments before the turmoil, always.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. I mean, she's without knowing it, she's on the verge of essentially a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right? She's clearly afraid of her mother, and in this production, there's not a lot of showcasing love between them. Mm-hmm. In the musical, it's there. Oh, I want to mention too, in that 2002 TV remake, Patricia Clarkson plays Margaret White. I don't think it's an effective portrayal of her at all, but they do a lot more with her character that's in the book than this movie does. And it also, that version ended with Carrie surviving and driving away, and it was meant to be a pilot for a Carrie TV series where it would be the many adventures of Carrie.
Oh my God, can you imagine?
That didn't happen. Anyway, she tells her mom that she started to bleed in gym class, and Miss Collins slapped me and a light bulb exploded. And Mama, why didn't you tell me? It's something that happens to all girls. And Margaret is not happy. She's scared. Margaret is scared.
She's very afraid. Yeah. And she also feels like a failure. You can tell instantly because she truly thinks had she raised Carrie more pure, that this wouldn't have happened.
Yes. Yeah. And I think she's been waiting for this day and avoiding it and hoping that it wouldn't happen. And yes, thinking that if she had done something differently, it never would have. Now, of course, that's impossible. This is a part of, a young
woman's anatomy. Yeah.
Woman's anatomy. Yes. It escalates quickly, and Margaret starts praying about the sin of Eve. And this goes back to Margaret's shame of female empowerment because she's placing all of this blame on humanity on Eve. And, Eve was weak and Eve succumbed to temptation. And she's really talking about herself because Margaret's big Margaret's big flaw in her life was that she had premarital sex and got knocked up,
Right.
It escalates really fast. Carrie is slapped and dragged into a closet, like a tiny, tiny prayer closet. And inside that closet is a statue or an idol of, a lot of people think that this is Jesus. It's not. In the prayer closet is a figure, he's shot with arrows, and it's Saint Sebastian. Now, a lot of people mistake this for Jesus. His eyes glow. It's very unsettling. It's very scary.
Yeah, it's creepy.
And Carrie is forced to pray, and she does. She starts saying, the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah. And I just think there's something so iconic about that drag that, like, it's vividly explained in the novel. It's very clear in the film when Piper just, like, pulls Sissy across that floor. And then it translates into the musicals too. And that it's her forcing Carrie out of fear.
It's abuse, it's
yeah.
it's not only mental abuse in this home, it's clearly physical abuse as well.
Yeah.
It's iconic. It's the most famous song from the musical, And Eve Was Weak. I used to sing it when I worked at a very famous West Village piano bar that will remain nameless because there are too many tourists there anyway. But it was one of my signature numbers that I used to do. And it was, the only chance in my life I'll ever get to play Margaret White. So
I don't think I'll ever ask anyone, talking to our stage combat director, being like, can she slap her across the face with a Bible? And it's just like the things that come out of this of like, how far does the abuse go and things like that.
yeah.
It's just really interesting.
There was a production of the musical with Alice Ripley, and the whole thing's available on YouTube. I ended up watching it. They lean very heavily into the mental health of Margaret. She's wearing like a flowery muumuu and bunny slippers around the house. When she sings When There's No One, she's looking in a mirror putting on whore makeup. And during the song, I Remember How Those Boys Could Dance, she grabs Carrie from behind and starts caressing her in a sexual way. And it didn't work. It's distracting from what's actually happening here, Anyway.
Well, I think if you lean too much into it, it makes it, like I said, Margaret's story and not Carrie's. And yes, we need Margaret, but this is Carrie's story.
And cartoonish,
Yeah.
Later that night, Carrie is let out of the closet. It seems like she might have fallen asleep in there, and at a point, Margaret unlocked it.
Mm-hmm.
And Margaret, Carrie comes out, apologizes to her mom, who's, I think she's sewing at that point, and says, I love you, Mama. I love you too, Carrietta. Carrie goes upstairs to her room. She lives, it's almost like she's kept up in the top, the second floor of the house. It's technically like maybe a room that's in the attic.
Mm-hmm.
And it maybe a little has like kind of a belfry feel, or like a Quasimodo locked away in a bell tower feel.
Absolutely. And their house is not small, right? So there's got to be another bedroom somewhere that's not the attic. And
the house looks small. House looks small from the outside. On the inside, it feels a little bit bigger, and yet somehow it's menacingly like enclosed.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of light in there. It's very dark.
Mm-hmm.
Her room has like a picture, of Jesus on the wall and a very small bed, and Carrie goes to bed. Next day at school, the girls get in trouble, and Miss Collins gathers those girls in the gymnasium. On the door to the gym, someone has written kind of graffiti. It says Carrie White eats shit. And there's like a janitor trying to scrub it off. Miss Collins reprimands the girls and tells them, it's a really messed up thing that you did to Carrie yesterday. Sue, specifically, what were you thinking? I'm very disappointed in you. Now, this is where we really meet Chris. Chris Hargensen is the actress who played her. Didn't approach it from Chris as a bitch. She approached it from Carrie is ruining things for me, right? At the point where she can't go to prom anymore. Now it's on. Now this is Carrie's fault. It's not my fault, right? So she wasn't. She purposely played the role not knowing that she's a bully, and that's how you play a villain, right? You think that you are right, and the means to your end are what are necessary.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct, and I think it's so clear that she thinks what she's doing is right, and she's just blown away that so many people like she screams out for her friends to help her, and they don't. In that scene, she's like, well, is anyone going to stand up with me and revolt so we can like all be put, because they can't keep us all from prom? And she's just baffled that she's alone in this, and it does really make her I think a villain akin to Margaret. Like, it's these two people who are destroying Carrie's life, who just both think what they're doing is so right for very different reasons.
Yeah. And so Miss Collins tells them, you have detention 1 hour every day after school for a week. You're mine on the field. We're doing calisthenics. we're working out. And Chris isn't having it, and at a point, Sue just looks at her and says, shut up, Chris.
Yeah.
And we move forward. So we're in class, English class, and the teacher is reading a poem. And it's a lovely poem. And it turns out that it was written by this boy named Tommy Ross. And he's handsome. He looks almost like the angel Gabriel. He's got this gorgeous,
he's a dreamboat,
blonde curly hair. And the teacher kind of pokes fun at him because he's a jock, right? And
the teacher pokes fun at a lot of them. The teacher's a dick. Like,
He
when
is.
you see what he's doing to all of them, and even just the way that he's reprimanding them, it's like, at first I was like, well, this isn't appropriate behavior for like a school in 2023. It wasn't appropriate behavior for the 70s. It was,
No.
he's just mean.
No. Yeah. And, he asks the class, what did everyone think of Tommy's poem? And no one speaks up. And Carrie just says, I liked it. And the teacher embarrasses her and says, oh, Carrie White, you're speaking up. What did you say? And, it just embarrasses her in front of everybody. And Tommy, under his breath, says, God, you suck. And the teacher says, what did you say? And he says, oh, shucks. So we have Tommy, we see Tommy get a reaction to Carrie liking his poem.
Right.
And we see him stand up for Carrie a little bit, right? He doesn't make a big deal of it, but it's clear that he disagrees with Carrie being treated this way.
Being bullied for liking it.
I mean, she's bullied by a teacher. She's bullied by her peers. She's bullied at home. This girl has no one to look to, no one to turn to.
Yeah, one of the lines I really like there is Carrie says it's beautiful. And then the teacher is like, for beautiful, for amber waves of grain. And it's just like, what is he even talking about? He's just being stupid to be unkind.
And that's exactly what he is. And so after school, Sue approaches Tommy and she feels bad about what she's done. She's the only one of all the girls who truly realizes that it was wrong and says, Tommy, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take Carrie to the prom instead of me. And he says, you're joking. But she's not. She really wants him to.
Yeah.
And she says, if you love me, you'll do this. And he reluctantly agrees. So this is coming out. This is the only way that Sue can see to make things right, is to give Carrie a little bit of happiness.
Well, and I think she also, there's something in there that, like, Ms. Collins says, like, if you don't agree to this punishment, you're out of the prom. So she sees being out of the prom as the punishment that fits the crime for what they did to Carrie in the locker room. So she's almost like self-imposing that punishment on herself to not get to go. Because if Tommy takes Carrie, she can't go. It's not a situation where you can go on your own. Like, you have to have a date to go with. And she wants to give her this wonderful thing that she was looking forward to. And it's ultimately very sweet, but just not well thought through.
Misled, for sure.
Yeah.
Misled intentions. That's a great point. I had never considered Sue kind of imposing the punishment on herself. I think that shows a bit of responsibility for her on her part,
Yeah.
So Carrie is in the school library looking at books about telekinesis because this is a thing. Right?
Yeah.
And Tommy comes up behind her and, what are you reading? Blah, blah, and she's scared of him or uncomfortable. Carrie, I think, is so used to people being mean to her now that anytime that someone tries to be nice, she knows that it's a joke. She knows that that she will, be a laughingstock.
Absolutely. And especially in that moment, it's not like she's doing homework. She's looking up books of telekinesis. It's this new private thing for her that almost gets exposed in that moment.
That's smart. That's really smart. And he asks her to the prom and she says, no, absolutely not. Like, why would you want me to go with you? And she ends up kind of like running away from him.
Yeah. I think at that point, she still very much thinks it's a trick.
Yeah. We see detention and there's this, if the rest of the score of this movie is very effective and brilliant, this music is terrible. It's almost like circus music. Who's the guy who does those Disneyland videos where he imposes himself in old...
Oh my God. Yes, I know what you're talking about.
Jack Plotnick does these hilarious videos. And so he did a, quote, deleted song from Carrie the Musical. And
what?
so he sets lyrics to this ridiculous music where it's all the girls bitching about working out.
I'm going to have to find this.
Betty Buckley shared it on social media. She thought it was so funny because it's shots of Miss Collins, Betty Buckley, bossing these kids around, and this clownish circus music, and there's a great close-up of Betty Buckley's legs, and she has thighs for days.
She is fine in this movie.
Yeah.
Like, Betty Buckley's a total babe.
She's got some great gams. Chris gets to a point where she's had enough, and she decides now's my moment to stand up for what's right in her mind, and she mouths off to Miss Collins. Miss Collins slaps her. The amount of people that Miss Collins slaps in this movie is admirable.
She gets slap happy, yeah.
Yeah, and Chris says, "You can't do that to me," and she's just incensed and says, "I'm not doing this detention." And Miss Collins says, "You're out of the prom, Hargison," and Chris walks away, and the other girls keep working out because they don't want to be kicked out of prom.
Right. And I think, some of them might at this point feel remorse, but who knows? The most important thing is that they don't get kicked out of prom, so they're going to shut up and run.
Exactly. Tommy pulls up at Carrie's house, and he shows up outside her door. I think this is the first time that we see the upside down cross from the point of view of looking out from the house. And Carrie answers, and she's instantly like, "What are you doing here?" And she steps outside and closes the door. She doesn't want her mom to know that there's a boy here.
Yeah.
And he asks her again, and she says no. And he asks a third time, and she obliges, and she's like, "Fine, if I say yes, will you get out of here? Will you just leave?"
Yeah, and there's this moment of like she's saying to herself, like, she would love to go, but she can't. And he's like, "Well, if you'd love to, then do it." And it's this scene, the more time I've spent with it, gives me such strong Romeo and Juliet vibes, right? Because they're outside, they're out on the porch, they're not inside. And then she keeps being like, and her mom keeps calling, and she's like, "I'm coming, like, I'm out here, it's fine." It's just very interesting to me that there's this like hint of unrequited love in there, that like, yeah, like in another world, if she wasn't Carrie White, she could easily accept, but she is Carrie White, so she can't.
Yeah, and she says yes and goes back in the house.
Yeah.
Chris is mad.
Chris is real mad.
Real pissed. And she dates Billy, who is a bad boy. He's been held back from in school a couple grades, probably. He's played by John Travolta in this film. And there's a scene of them riding around in his car, because back in the 70s, that's what you did. You went cruising around in your car, right? And it's just this movie captures 1976 very well in a lot of ways. It's kind of a comedic scene where this car full of girls pass by and flirt with him, and then a car full of bros pass by and they toss him a beer, and they park outside of I think it's a bar probably that they're gonna go hang out in. And there's this exchange where she calls him stupid, and it's a great acting moment from John Travolta, because Billy's an asshole and he's abusive. He doesn't like being called stupid. And he says, I told you to stop calling me that. And he's sad the first time that she says it. The second time she said, he's vulnerable the first time she says it. The second time he smacks her.
Yeah.
This turns her on. And we get some insight into Chris's mentality, psyche, right? A little bit. Because I don't know how well the film showcases it, but Chris is abused at home by her dad, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this carries on into her boyfriend. And look, I'm all about playing rough. Smack me, fuck me like you hate me, that's fine. But not if it's going to be unconsensual,
Absolutely.
And so, it's clear that this is a dangerous relationship that she's in. And she starts giving him head. And it's very comical, because she's clearly giving him a blowjob, but she's speaking clearly,
Yes.
Like, she should be talking like this and telling him, "Hey, I want you to dump pig's blood on Carrie White." When she says Carrie White, he's like, "Who?" He doesn't even know who Carrie is. And so Chris is forming a plan.
Yes, she's forming a plan. That scene, this is a short anecdote. I'll make it short. But my aunt, I remember when I was in high school, my aunt wanted something from my uncle, and it was like really small. Like, she wanted like $20 to go to the movies with us girls or something. And she got it. And I was like, "How'd you get that money?" And she was like, "Oh, I just promised him a favor later." And I was like, at the time, I was like, I was a kid, and I was like, yeah, okay, she's just going to do him a favor later. I later in life realized that anytime my aunt said, "I'm going to do him a favor," it was give him a BJ. And
Oh, God. I hope she doesn't listen to this.
She will remain nameless, which aunt this is. But in
I
the
have a lot of aunts, so it could be any one
I
of
know
them.
I have many aunts, and they're all coming to see Carrie. But the song in the musical is called "Do Me a Favor." And
Oh,
so
shit, you're right.
So I died the first time I read the script because I was like, oh my God, they're doing favors.
That is so funny. Well, and it's an interesting, the song is, the song has Sue asking Tommy to do her a favor. And the song also has Chris asking Billy to do her a favor. And I think that's a really smart way that they composed that and put that together for the musical.
Yeah. And the women are very much using their sexuality as their power to get what they want in that moment.
Yes.
Which, like, that's what doing a favor is, really, when you think about it.
I've done a favor or two in my day.
Yeah, haven't we all?
I would like to think I'm pretty good at doing favors for people. I've had no complaints. Let me just say that.
Oh my gosh. Elvira, I'm sorry. Are you all right?
Yeah, I think so.
How's your head?
I haven't had any complaints yet.
So you would get Billy to throw the pig's blood on Carrie? You think?
Played by John Travolta in a heartbeat.
Oh God! I mean, he's like multiverse Danny Zuko in this movie, right?
Yeah,
it's all the coolness.
But with added danger and
yes,
and also I would certainly never pair up with someone like Billy who's that abusive. But I will say I always tend to go for like problematic men. Who are clearly never going to give me the things that I'm looking for in a relationship. You've seen me date. You know my history.
I'm the bad guy. Duh.
Yes. I abstain from comment there.
Thank you. So,
she does the favor, and Billy agrees. Is that he agrees. He's already like pissed at her because she's called him stupid, which, keep in mind, he has like spilled beer on her in the car because he's trying to hide the beer from the cops, but that's not enough to merit calling someone stupid. But he agrees that he's going to do this thing because she hates Carrie White so much, and hating Carrie White turns her on.
Yeah, I think it's a great scene. It's an uncomfortable scene, but I do think it's a good scene.
Yeah.
So Carrie turns to Miss Collins and says, Tommy asked me to prom. I don't know what to do in this situation. Miss Collins, I don't think Miss Collins is that much older than Carrie. She's like kind of the young.
She's a young teacher, I think. Yeah. Absolutely. Like maybe first or second year.
I do think that she fills in as a mother figure that Carrie just doesn't have. Right. Yeah. She also is so close in age that maybe she fills in as a friend figure as well.
Yeah.
Miss Collins' intentions are to protect Carrie, but she does encourage her, this could be the best night of your life. It's a very important night for a young person to go to prom. I remember my prom. And then she pulls out lipstick and puts it on Carrie. And
I know.
They look at, shows her herself in the mirror, and Carrie instantly shuts down and walks away. She's never seen her. She first up, beyond never seeing herself with makeup on, Carrie's never looked at herself and felt that she was pretty.
Right. And she has this woman that she trusts, who is the woman who like swooped up, and even though it was with a slap, but the woman who got her out of the shock in the showers, a woman who I think has been there for her, telling her, look at that's a pretty girl, and it's too much. She can't handle it.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that slap too, because if Margaret shows her, quote, love with physical abuse, maybe Carrie clings to Miss Collins because she slaps her.
Yeah.
Right. If Chris is responding to a slap in her way by it turning her on, I mean, this might be what Carrie thinks as love.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Miss Collins didn't mean to hurt her in a hard, mean way. It was really to snap her out of it.
To get her out of the shock, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so I think that's a lovely, if a little bit maybe saccharine or silly scene, but I think it's lovely. It's well acted. So at night, Chris and Billy and a bunch of their goons sneak into a pig farm. And at this point, we don't know the plan yet. It's coming together. And if you haven't seen the film, which I would say by the time most people see the movie now, they know that there's pig blood and they know that they know the prom scene, right?
I
But
would
when this
agree.
movie,
Yeah, I mean, the second I say I'm directing this, that's what people say. So
yeah, so so you see what's coming. But if you see in this movie in the 70s, you don't know why they're doing this, but they kill a pig. It's pretty brutal. You don't see the pig getting hit, but you see John Travolta take it's a sledgehammer and start beating a pig with it.
something I did love in the remake is that Chris is actually the one who kills the pig, and I think that there's something very cool about that. I mean,
Me too.
it's not as written, but it's just we were talking about, things that a female director did bring to it, is that she let the woman be the one to kill the pig.
Yeah, and I think that's appropriate. I think it makes more sense than, I mean, in the 70s, I could see the portrayal of a woman having her boyfriend do the dirty work, but
Yeah.
in the Broadway musical, this was the most infamously bad scene. This is it's technically the Act 2 opener.
Yes.
And the original production, the song was called Out for Blood. And there's this weird rap moment in the middle. Pig, kill the pig, kill the pig. And they had an animatronic pig come up from under the stage, and you hear it screeching for help. And then they kill the pig, and there's blood everywhere. And
it's a simple little gig. You help me kill a pig, and then I've got some plans for the blood.
the costumes at this point are like the guys are in leather harnesses and like leather pants with leather jackets, and it makes no sense. It's so 80s. By the time it got to Broadway, the song was changed. Originally it was called Cracker Jack. The Broadway version was called Out for Blood. They took the animatronic pig away, so they dive under the stage, you hear the pig squeal, and then they pull up a bucket of pig's blood. You don't see the pig get killed. Shit, look at all these pigs! Regardless, no, famously, like, people were booing after this scene. They didn't know what the hell they were looking at. So we see Tommy and his boys go tuxedo shopping. Meanwhile, Carrie is trying on makeup, and it's weird because she's in the drugstore and she's literally just it's my cat. She's in the drugstore and she's literally just taking lipstick and putting it directly on her face, which would never happen.
I'm like, CVS might not have that return policy yet. You can't just use makeup in a store, Carrie.
If you go to Mac, they use a swab to put it on you.
Right.
Anyway, we get this, the weird circus music is back, and the boys have this, like, they speed up their dialogue and it turns into chipmunks talking, and then it slows down again, and they do that a couple of times. It's cute. It's 1976. It does not match the rest of the movie, but whatever.
It's a getting ready montage.
Wait a minute. Let's see. Do we have time for a movie montage?
Oh, well,
Yeah, exactly. Carrie is at dinner with her mom, and we see them on opposite ends of the table, and behind them is that Last Supper tapestry. And her mom says, Carrietta, you haven't finished your apple cake. It'll give me pimples, Mama. Well, pimples are the Lord's way of chastising us. A lot of the Carrie and Margaret dialogue is lifted from the book, and then also almost identical to the musical as well.
Yeah, that scene is verbatim almost.
Carrie tells her mom, I've been invited to go to prom. Tommy Doyle, he's a very nice boy, and I've accepted. And Margaret laughs at first and then gets very serious, and she starts talking about, he smells the blood on you. Now that you're bleeding, they're going to come sniffing, and they're hounds, these men.
Yeah, she makes it like bears and sharks can sniff out blood like men. Like, it's very interesting that she's just that's what he's after.
Compares her daughter to a dog in heat, essentially.
Yeah.
Right? She starts to tell the story of, I went through this. I know what's happening. I succumbed to the lusts of the flesh, and I will not have it. And they have this big back and forth, and Carrie stands up to her for the first time in her life and says, I'm going to prom. Margaret says, I'm not doing it. You're not doing it. I have to close the windows. It's raining. And Carrie uses her telekinesis to shut all the windows in the house. And Margaret turns around and she's terrified. And, Carrie says, this is the end of the conversation. I'm going to prom.
Yeah.
And she goes up to her room, and Margaret's horrified.
That's the end of Act 1 in the musical. And it says in the stage directions that then Carrie sits down and finishes her apple pie. And I don't think that makes any sense. So I'm very excited. Carrie drops the apple pie at Margaret's feet and walks off stage. It's like a mic drop.
I like that.
It's pretty. She's just because she realizes in that moment that she can have telekinesis even around her mother, and she doesn't have to be afraid of Margaret anymore at all.
Carrie has made her prom dress. Now, in the book, the dress is red. Let's talk colors in this movie for a minute. Blue is used a lot in this film. Blue and red as two opposites.
Mm-hmm.
Blue is purity. Carrie wears a lot of blue. Tommy wears a lot of blue. He has blue eyes. He drives a blue car. Chris drives a red car. Norma wears a red hat.
Mm-hmm.
Red is signifying evil, the devil, danger. Whereas anywhere that you see blue in the movie, it is purposely there to showcase Carrie's innocence. When she goes to prom in the film, she wears a pink dress, which I think is smart. I think that if they had done a red dress, it would have been a little too on the nose. Pink is a little hint of the red, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because Margaret still says, she looks at her and says, red, I should have known it would be red. And then Carrie's like, Mama, it's pink.
Red. I might have known it would be red.
It's pink, Mama.
I can see your dirty pillows. Everyone will.
Breasts, Mama. They're called breasts. And every woman has them.
Well, in the script, they didn't... in the film, it was going to be a red dress, and they changed it to pink, but they didn't change it. They didn't change the line. And they ended up not doing it because it really gives Margaret this, insanity, right?
Yeah, she sees what she wants to see. I think that Margaret is seeing a red dress.
Totally. Absolutely. Carrie's putting on her dress. She puts on a shawl. She's checking her makeup in the mirror, and her mother comes up and she says, it's not too late. You can stay home and we'll pray all night. And
take off that dress. No. We'll burn it together and pray for forgiveness.
He's gonna laugh and they're all gonna laugh at you.
Look, it's not too late.
Very dramatic, and and she's just trying to lure her daughter into not leaving her. Margaret is afraid of being alone.
Mm-hmm.
And she puts her hands on Carrie, and Carrie says no, and with her mind throws Margaret back on the bed.
Hurry, look, I'll tell him that you changed your mind.
Just sit there, Mama, and don't say a word until I'm gone. Be home early. Love you, Mama.
And she says, I'll be home early. Don't wait around for me. I'm going. And she walks out, and Margaret sits up in the bed, and she quotes the Bible and says,
Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live.
And she starts, in the musical, this would be where she sings When There's No One.
Yeah. And it's just so interesting. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. What? And she truly thinks she's being called towards Abraham. And I think it's in that moment when she realizes, okay, well, she's going, I have to kill her. She makes her mind up the moment Carrie leaves that house.
Yeah. You know what? Carrie breaks her mirror after, I think it's after when she tells her mother that she's going to prom, she goes upstairs and looks in the mirror, and it breaks, hanging on the wall. So when she's looking at herself in the mirror before she goes to prom, it's
splintered.
Fractured. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which is maybe a little telling of what happens to the rest of her house a little bit later. It's starting.
Yeah.
Tommy takes her to prom, and they walk in. The way that this film showcases prom from the moment that they enter to the moment that they leave, to me, is excellent. It's some of the best filmmaking of all time. Mm-hmm. The scale of this prom, the amount of single takes of panning over it and seeing business happen all over the room in a single take. The choreographing that to me was just very smart.
Yeah, and I think they were very, very smart to do very traditional decorations, right? Like in the novel, the prom theme is springtime in Venice or something, and they talk about this canvas painting or something that's been done of like a gondolier, and I just don't think that would have read. Like it's very interesting detail in the book, and it paints the picture there. But when you're sitting there watching it, we have lots of stars, we have glittery shiny lights, we have some fog, we have like everything that's just like a big prom.
Yeah, really... I think the theme in the film is love among the stars. And
yes.
I think this is a throwback to the novel, because the last thing that Carrie sees before she expires in the book, she looks up and sees a star in the sky. And so I think it might be coming from there. They have a band playing and everyone's, dressed up cute. Norma is wearing her hat, her red baseball cap.
At the prom,
yeah. It's just her thing. She's that goofy, weird girl. The goofy, weird, popular girl, right?
Yeah.
We know her.
It's because Chris condones it, so it's okay. If Chris said that was stupid, it wouldn't fly.
A lot's happening at once. First off, they walk in. One of the girls takes Carrie's arm and says, the boys are bullshitting each other. In the book, Carrie takes this moment. She sees a guy give Tommy a hard time and says, I could use my telekinesis to break this kid in half right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So she's a little defensive of Tommy.
Yeah.
A little protective. But then one of the girls takes her aside and says, don't worry, if they kill each other, I'll dance with you. Where did you get your dress? And Carrie says, I made it. And Carrie and Tommy sit down. Tommy asks her to dance and she says, no, would you just go get us some punch? And Miss Collins comes and sits with her and tells the story of her prom. And they have this beautiful, lovely kind of girl-to-girl moment. And she asks Carrie, how does it feel? And Carrie says, it feels like being on Mars. And it's just really lovely. Carrie, you see her open up a little bit. There's like the hint of a smile. She just, her mouth kind of gleams a little more and more as the scene progresses.
Yeah. You see her start to not feel like Mars, realize that this is an incredible night, but like she is a part of it and she deserves to be there.
Yeah. Tommy comes back, asks her to dance again. She says no. And then the ballots for prom king and queen are distributed and their name is on it. And she says, well, who do we vote for? We can't vote for ourselves. And Tommy says, sure we can. To the devil with false modesty. And Carrie looks at him and smiles and says, to the devil. And I just think it's very interesting using the term to the devil with false modesty when her entire life has been avoiding the devil,
Right.
So they vote for themselves. Now, in the book, there's a tie and then a tie breaker.
Mm-hmm.
Because Norma's walking around collecting these ballots, but this is the long pan. This is one of the long pan scenes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Norma takes their ballots. We follow Norma carrying these ballots. She kisses her boyfriend who has more ballots under his coat. So she takes his ballots and kicks everybody else's, the real ballots, underneath the stage.
Mm-hmm.
She walks over to the judge's booth, which is the teachers. They're counting all the ballots and she says, I got some more ballots for you. So now she is giving these fake ballots to them. The camera continues to pan and underneath the stage, we see Chris and Billy. And Chris has kind of like she's holding onto a rope. And we follow this rope up along the side of the stage, up to the rafters. And it is attached to a bucket of blood. They decorated this bucket of blood, by the way. I noticed this time there's one of their tinfoil stars is like pasted to the bucket.
In case somebody sees the bucket. That's hysterical.
I guess. Yeah. Now, Sue sneaks in the back door to prom. She just wants to see Carrie having a good time.
Yeah, she wants to see that what she's done is worked.
Yeah. In the book, there are 2 buckets of blood. One for Carrie, one for Tommy.
Mm-hmm.
In the film, there's just the one.
Yeah.
Tommy asks Carrie to dance a third time, and she says, I don't know how. And he says, well, I'm going to teach you. And they go dance. And I love this scene. The actors are standing on an axis that's rotating, and the camera is rotating around them, and it speeds up as this dialogue progresses, right? So it starts off feeling like they're dancing just normally in a circle, and then it gets faster and faster the more that, the scene elevates. And they have this really lovely dialogue, and Tommy kisses Carrie.
Yeah, and that's something that it took me a while to come to terms with. I'm like, is he cheating on Sue? What's going on there? But I think that for him, he wants to give her this whole night she's never had, and he wants to give her a perfect prom night, complete with a little kiss. You know, it's not like he's making out with her. He doesn't hop a feel or anything. It's just this like small, lovely kiss that he gives her. And
There's no tongue. There's no tongue. It's a really delicate, nice moment.
Yeah. And it's just, he's gifting her another moment of the prom.
This is where I think she finally, her guard is completely down, you know?
Yeah.
And it's time to announce prom king and queen.
Yes.
It's them. They win. And we get another long pan. So we see them sitting at their table, and it's kind of a faraway shot of them standing up. Tommy like puts a fist in the air and he's so excited, and they stand up and they start walking, and this beautiful, you know, kind of strings music starts playing, and Carrie's smiling, maybe a tear in her eye, and everyone's clapping for them. And they make their way to the stage. Sue, who is standing next to the stage, hidden kind of behind it, happens to notice a string being tugged at that's moving up toward the rafters.
Right.
And she starts following the string down. While this is happening, Carrie and Tommy make their way up to the stage. Carrie is placed with a tiara on her head and given a bouquet of flowers, and she's so happy. It really breaks my heart every time because she's so happy. And as Sue is making her way around the stage to look underneath it, Miss Collins stops smiling and clapping and sees Sue Snell approaching, and she says, I knew it. I knew Sue had nothing but trouble on her mind, you know? And so this is all in slow motion. Music starts getting a little like twisted and demented.
And again, it's a moment that if she would just listen, because Sue was saying, please listen to me. Please listen to me. Let me explain. It's not me. It's not me, but something bad is about to happen. Please.
And what's effective about this scene is that you hear no dialogue. You see them saying this, but it's all music and cheering, right? But it is Sue pleading. You have to pay attention. Sue looks under the stairs and sees Billy and Chris holding the rope, and Sue knows, and she's like pleading, Miss Collins, let me explain. Something bad is going to happen. She's pointing, and Miss Collins won't have it, and she shoves her out the door. Now, not knowing that this would essentially save her life, you know?
Right.
So Sue is now locked out of prom. Miss Collins returns to all of the clapping, and it comes to this heightened crescendo, and Chris yanks the rope, and that bucket of pig's blood dumps on top of Carrie. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's so iconic, you know? And we get silence during Carrie's reaction, and it's shock, and it's betrayal, and it's fear. And then we hear Margaret say, they're all going to laugh at you.
They're all going to laugh at you!
Because that's what Margaret told her.
Right.
Right. And that kind of starts playing on a loop. They're all going to laugh at you. They're all going to laugh at you.
They're all going to laugh at you! They're all going to laugh at you!
We're all sorry, Cassie. We're all sorry, Cassie.
Trust me, Carrie. You can trust me. Trust me, Carrie. You can trust me. Trust me, Carrie. You can trust me.
And Carrie's vision splits into kind of a kaleidoscope. And this is where we get, it's so 1976, but it so works in this scene. We get kind of a split screen effect happening. Carrie's mind has fractured, right?
Right.
In her mind, she's seeing everyone continue. There's shock at first, and then they start laughing. And you have to put together in your head, are these kids really laughing at Carrie covered in blood? Or is this in her mind? Has she had enough, right? Because it deliberately shows Miss Collins laughing at her as well. And I don't think Miss Collins would laugh at this. I think that Carrie is placing the blame on everybody in this room. She has had, listen, when I was in 5th grade, AJ fucking Miller shoved me and called me a faggot for the last time, and I saw red. And I grabbed him by the head and slammed it into a basketball hoop, like the pole of a basketball hoop. And I straddled him and started beating the shit out of him to a point that a teacher was afraid to pull me off of him. And it was because I had had enough, you
Yeah.
can only take so much before you explode. And
yeah, totally.
it was rough, but kids are mean.
Kids are mean, and she's been in this pressure cooker, and then it just, like you said, it's like her mom, Miss Collins rather, and like everybody is just coming at her, and it's pushing, and then it explodes. I also think that it's in Carrie's mind. I do think that there's probably some like nervous laughter and snickers, because people laugh when they're scared and they don't know what else to do. They laugh when they're nervous, and so I think that that's what it is. But in her mind, she sees everybody laughing at her and pointing at her, and she's out of control at this point.
Yeah. Lights go out. She looks up, and all the lights go out, and it's red, just red lighting, drowning in red, and the doors close and lock. A fire hose is, with her mind, comes out of kind of the fire hose case and starts spraying these kids down. Now, there's a lot of phallic objects in this film. The shower head that is showering on Carrie at the very beginning has a very phallic shape to it.
Mm-hmm.
There's when Carrie leaves for the prom, there's a scene of Margaret pacing back and forth in her kitchen, and she grabs a carrot and she grabs a butcher knife and she starts chopping the carrot up. So she's chopping this phallic symbol up. The fire hose has this phallic symbol to it. It also reminds me of the fire hose in The Shining, but that book wouldn't come out until a couple years later. Anyway, she's hosing the kids down and spraying them against the wall. The principal and I think the guy who leads the band are trying to get to the microphone to say, everybody calm down. And Carrie sees this, and she sprays the wire of the microphone with water, and they get electrically shocked. And this causes the backdrop of the stage to burst into flames. And it's this gorgeous, this is not CGI. They had live fire. Sissy Spacek was standing 10 feet away from this wall of flame,
Yeah.
She deliberately kills Miss Collins. There's a moment Miss Collins is up against a wall and she calls out, "Carrie, please." And Carrie, a piece of the ceiling falls and kind of like pins her against the wall and almost cuts her in half.
Yeah.
Yeah. She made the deliberate choice to kill her, which I think is, speaks volumes of where Carrie's mentality is right now. Chris and Billy escape before any of this happens. They pull the cord and they book it out of there. They see it happening, though. They look in a window and they see what's going on.
Yeah, and they can't believe it. I mean, it's so much. And I think Carrie making the deliberate choice to kill Miss Collins is really distinct. And we have to talk about the bucket hitting Tommy's head, right? Like, that's what takes Tommy out. And I debate a lot of like, would Carrie have killed Tommy? Because at that point, she thinks everybody's in on it.
Yeah. Are you going to tell us if in your production Carrie kills Tommy or not, or do we have to wait and go see it? We haven't said this yet. I'm flying out to Ohio to see this show and get to hang out with Victoria for a few days and see this production of my favorite musical directed by my favorite person. So I can't wait for this. You know what? Don't tell me. I want to wait and see.
I will say that it took me a very long time to craft the destruction scene, because you need the spectacle, right? It also needs to be canon, and I think some people forget this, but I think it makes a lot more sense. Carrie can't create fire. Carrie can move a hose and move wires that then burst into flame, but it's not part of her telekinesis power that she can just like, boom, create fire. Like, that's a different kind of magic. So how does that progression look like? And also, there's a lot of difference of how much violence we can tolerate watching on a screen when they're like not with us. It's still a person, but you're on a screen and I can watch it because I'm removed from it, versus watching it on a stage. And watching somebody in a room get murdered in front of you. I crafted very specific moments, but I had to choose the ones that I wanted, because otherwise we hated Carrie by the end of it. Because we were watching it happen on the stage. So I think you'll be pleased with what I do. I think you're going to go, oh my God, but it's, we have fire, we have modern dance, we have actors like tumbling all around each other. It looks it's good. And Tommy's death is a moment that I think you will appreciate.
Wow. Oh my God. I can't wait. Cannot wait. So Carrie descends the stage. Her pose is lifted from a very famous painting of Lady Macbeth standing in front of fire. I think, did I send you that painting of Lady Macbeth in front of the fire? Yeah. So she's got her arms straight down and her fingertips pointed outward, and this, I mean, very scary, frightening look on her face. She does so much with so little, you know.
Yeah.
She makes her way through the crowd, and the doors open for her. She steps out. Everything's engulfed in flames, and the doors close behind her. Carrie is walking home.
Again, walking home. Like nothing has happened.
This time covered in blood, and her, she's still got that really scary pose as she's walking. Chris and Billy in Billy's car are approaching, and Chris grabs the wheel and starts aiming it toward Carrie, and Carrie turns around and the car swerves and then flips and flips and flips and explodes. And that's how she kills Chris and Billy.
Yeah.
In the book, she destroys the town. She blows up a gas station, maybe 2 gas stations. She sets a house on. A house catches on fire due to what she does to it. I think it has to do with power cables or something like that. And I think
she burns everything down. Like Chamberlain Dean is gone.
Yeah, I think she kills 428 people that night, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
She gets home and it's glowing from the inside. The windows are glowing this really like bright yellow golden glow. And it's silent. And then she steps in and we see, I mean, there was a sale at Yankee Candle Company or something, because hundreds and hundreds of candles. And we get this spooky choral, like almost triumphant choral music. We're drowning in this religious sounding, but beautiful music. And she slowly makes her way through her house, and there's candles on the stairs leading up to the attic. She makes it to the top of the stairs, and it's a brilliant thing, because the first time you see this, you don't see her, but Margaret is standing behind the door, and you don't see her until Carrie turns on the bathroom light and it illuminates Margaret. But now after you've seen it, you see it every time. It's like in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, you don't see Magenta like leaning on the banister until you do. And now every time I watch it, I see her before she says, "You're lucky, I'm lucky, we're all lucky," right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But she's in plain view and you don't notice her. Anyway, Carrie draws a bath and takes off her clothes.
Yeah, she can't find her mom, so she takes a bath which is, practical because she's covered in blood. But I think it's really interesting that it's the second time in the film Carrie has found herself covered in blood and then is cleansed. Like, she has the gym shower, and then now it's a bath in her home.
Well, I wonder if there's a little bit of a baptism symbolism in this as well.
Totally.
Right? Because if a baptism is you committing your life to Christ, this is Carrie saying, "I'm done with people, and I'm going to believe my mama now,"
Yeah.
Maybe baptizing herself in the name of her mother, rather than in the name of Jesus. She puts on a light blue nightgown, right? She's taken off the pink, and she's back to her blue, and steps out of the bathroom, and Margaret comes up behind her, and Margaret gives this fucking incredible speech talking about how, your father and I were living together in sin, but we never had sex. We shared a bed, but we never touched each other until one night he gave me the look. And we got on our knees and we prayed and, prayed for strength, but we were weak. I was weak. And talks about the night that Carrie was conceived. I smelled the bourbon on his breath and I liked it.
And he took me. The stink of filthy roadhouse whiskey on his breath. And I liked it.
And I liked it. Yeah, I think she's
almost orgasmic in this moment. She is maybe a little turned on at the thought of it, and yet, so much shame. And she says, I should have killed you then and there. Like I should have ended it.
Well, that dirty touching of his hands on me all over me. I should have given you to God when you were born. And I was weak and backsliding.
and Carrie says, "I'm so sorry, Mama. Everyone laughed at me. You were right. And, you know, I'll be good. I promise I'll never do this again." And Margaret pulls a knife out.
Now the devil is come home. We'll pray. Yes. We'll pray. For the last time, we'll pray.
And plunges it into Carrie's back. And Carrie tumbles backward down the stairs and lands at the bottom. And she's kind of crab walking away, like pulling herself away from her mother. And you get this great POV shot from Carrie's point of view on the floor of Margaret descending the stairs. She's got a crazed look on her eyes, and she takes the knife and she makes the sign of the cross over her daughter. And she's got one hand in the air to bless her and one hand in the air with a knife. And Carrie is backed up against the prayer closet, and she, with her mind, shoots a knife from the kitchen drawer, and it lands on Margaret's hand, nailing her to one side of the doorway.
Yeah.
And then another one, and it nails her other hand to the side of the doorway. Now one hand is high up, one hand is down below. We start to see Margaret look like this statue of Saint Sebastian that's in the prayer closet.
Yes.
Because a vegetable peeler gets impaled in her chest, and then another knife. And every time that Margaret gets penetrated, she makes a moaning sexual sound. And it's almost like she comes as it's a release for her, right?
It's an escape. Her death is an escape.
And it sounds orgasmic, moving back, touching again on her sexual repression and her shame at her sexual power. This escape, this release for her is kind of that climax for her, and it's not in like a vulgar or in your face way. It's just there, and it's intentional. She, at her final moment, at her final breath, kind of tilts her head to the side and looks onward, and it does reflect Jesus on the cross.
Very much.
But it's intended to also be Saint Sebastian in this idol or this statue that they have in the prayer closet. Carrie begins to cry, and the house begins to shake. Now, in the book, Carrie stops her mother's heart with her mind, and that's how Margaret dies. And then she rains boulders all over the house. It had happened once when she was a child. She does it again to destroy the house. They started filming this for the movie, and the effect wasn't looking good. But there are scenes when the ceiling is starting to cave in, where you can see boulders coming through because they had already filmed it, and they used that, which I never noticed until it was pointed out to me. The house begins to sink, and Carrie climbs up to her mom. She pulls one knife out of one hand and kind of starts holding her mom. And then she tugs her mom, and like you hear the knife slice through the other hand.
It's
terrible sound. You don't see it, but you hear it. And they fall to the floor together. Margaret's dead. Carrie's crying and looking up, and the house sinks down into the ground in this almost like a hellish pit of flame because of all the candles. And that is the end of Carrie. Well, as a person, not the movie.
Yes, that's Carrie's end.
It's really beautiful music. Again, it could be a very scary, horror movie score, and it's not. It's again a little bit triumphant sounding, or just not triumphant, but moving. We see Sue Snell dressed in a white gown, just kind of a flowy dress, and she's approaching Carrie's house down the street with a bouquet of flowers. Now, this film was seen backwards, so technically Amy Irving was walking backward as they filmed this. De Palma did this so that her dress would move in a weird way and her hair would move in a weird way, but so it feels a little unnatural.
Yeah, it feels not of this earth.
But you can see cars driving backward in the background, and I think why wouldn't you just shut down the street or not include shots of the street in this, like you had to notice cars, whatever. She approaches the place where Carrie's house used to be, and it's all burnt cinders, kind of like almost like burnt rubble essentially. And there's a big for sale sign that's in the shape of a cross, and someone has graffitied "Carrie White burns in hell" with an arrow pointing down on it. So they're mean to her even in fucking death.
Even in death, yeah.
Sue approaches and kneels down, and the sky, it's subtle. The sky is no longer blue when she looks up at the for sale cross. The sky behind it is now black.
Mm-hmm.
And she lays the flowers down at the cross, and it's one of the best, most effective jump scares in horror history. A hand reaches up from the rubble and grabs Sue and tries to pull her under, and it's covered in blood. It's Carrie's hand. Now, Sissy Spacek insisted to be the one to do this, and so that is Sissy Spacek's hand reaching up from the ground to grab Sue. And Sue, we see Sue wake up in her bedroom, screaming and rocking back and forth. Her mother is grabbing her arm, trying to calm her, and it has been a nightmare. A nightmare that Sue is having.
Which that's why I think they're okay with the backward cars. I didn't want to give away nightmare until you got there, but I think.
Yeah, I just think, I mean, backward car, sure. Dress moving, flowing backward is one thing. Backward car is a different thing. But regardless,
anyway, yeah.
I mean, Sue is never going to be normal again. Literally, all of her friends have died.
Everyone has died.
And the survivor's guilt, but B, Sue, if it's not just survivor's guilt, it's also Sue is going to blame herself because she's the one that put Carrie up for going to the prom.
She's the one who's, first off, she sent Tommy to the prom without her, with Carrie. So, that would be enough, even if Tommy was the only one who died, to screw up for forever. But then it's like she is the one who put everything into motion that made the final event that pushed Carrie over the edge.
And that's Carrie. That's the end of Carrie.
Carrie.
The person and the movie. So, Victoria, on Brick or Treat Horrorcast, we have a rating system. A movie is either a trick, which means it's all right, or a treat, which means you loved it, or it's a smell my feet, which means it sucks. How do you rate 1976's Carrie?
Oh, it's 100% a treat. It's incredible. It's this beautiful, beautiful film that takes it adapts from the novel in the way that it needs to. It's verbatim from the novel when it can be. It's truly, it's a horror film that I love. Right down to that last jump scare, because we see so much humanity in it, and we realize what is scarier than the truth.
Same for me. It's a treat. If it's on TV, I won't just turn it on. I will sit down and watch it. And if it's not on TV, I will watch it anyway. I love this movie. It's one of my earlier memories of watching a horror movie with my mom, and my mom was a very religious woman. And she took issue with the depiction of Margaret White, but she always made a point. She definitely made a point to explain this movie to me in a way that I appreciate. It's a memory of watching this movie from early childhood. And that's what we have for the show. Victoria, I need two things from you. Tell my listeners, if they happen to be in Ohio, where and when they can see this show, and then tell me where they can stalk you online.
Amazing. Okay, so if you are in Athens, Ohio, which is about an hour outside of Columbus, so if you're in Columbus, drive here, come see us. It is at Tantrum Theater at Ohio University. It's the professional theater company run through Ohio University. You can get all the tickets on tantrumarts.org or Ohio University School of the Arts. Very easy to find. Tantrum has a great Instagram and a great Twitter, and you can follow the show that way. You can see our killer poster design and the set, which is very exciting to me, are all up there right now. So follow Tantrum Theater. You can stalk me. Everything is just my name. It's at Victoria Rae Sook on Instagram and Twitter, and I think I still have my Facebook's very boring. It's just pictures of my cats. But stalk me professionally on Insta and Twitter, and you can see me. I have my next show's on the docket, but the contract's not signed, so keep posted on the website victoriaraesook.com, and that announcement will be coming soon.
I love this. And wait, the show opens and closes when?
Yes, thank you. It opens March 9th and it closes March 25th. So you've got some time.
Well, I will see you on March 9th. I can't wait. Literally, it will be, when this drops, it'll be less than a week away. And you can follow me, Ricky, at Rick the letter R Treat on Instagram. You can read my reviews for films at www.spoilerfreereviews.com and check out my contributions to Rue Morgue magazine at rue-morgue.com. And thank you very much, Victoria. We'll see y'all later, spookies.
Bye.
Thanks for coming Rick-or-treating. You can follow the show on Instagram at RickOrTreatPod. It'd be a real scream if you'd take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review the show on whatever platform you're listening on. The show's spooky intro and outro music is a cover of Camille Saint-Saëns' Danse Macabre, with orchestrations composed and performed by Lestat von Monlicht. Links to the artist's music can be found in the episode description. Check him out, he's frighteningly talented. Rick or Treat Horrorcast is independently produced by me, Ricky J. Duarte of Rick or Treat Productions. If you like what you heard, tell a friend. If you didn't, well, they're coming to get you, listener.
Shit, look at all these pigs! They're all gonna laugh at you!
Totally.